Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online character build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, I bring you the Undead Hunter Ranger. And before I get started, disclaimer, this is a roleplay, casual play build. It is not meant for meta play. So the idea behind this is a ranger that hunts the undead on the outskirts of civilization. They pretty much hunt anything from vampires to liches to wraiths to ghosts, skeletons, zombies, anything like that. And because of the rise of the necromancers, they also have decided to work alongside blood hunters to help face off against the necromancers as well, because they brought a lot of undead with them. They specialize in hunting them. So this is a really cool time for this to be added to the game with the elsewhere and everything else, and I just felt it really fit. Now, going on to the character here, we are a Khajiit Templar for this. You can be any race, gonna let you know that now, and of course, like I said, this is the Undead Hunter Ranger. Primarily, it is a damage dealer. It can also play support really well, it can also play damage really well, and it can play tank very good. So, it can be a healer as well. So, going over the setup for damage dealer and attribute points is 64 points in a stamina. This is going to give you the higher stamina pool, and it's going to allow you for that greater DPS in your rotation. Now, if you want to play this as a tank, you would take the 64 out of stamina and put enough in health to get you as close to 30k as possible, or right at 30k, and put the rest back into stamina. This is going to give you a good resource pool for stamina, health, and magicka, so you can effectively tank properly with this. Now, to play this as a healer, you will take the 64 points out of stamina and you will put it all into magicka. This way you can play a more effective healer. And I will tell you about the Mundus Stones and what you should change to get the better benefits when we get down to Mundus Stones, and which one we have active. So going over the stats, starting with the first stat, Max Magicka, we do have 20k. Max Magicka, this gives us a good, well-rounded amount of Magicka, and allows us for good sustainability, not only in using certain magic abilities, but also in being able to bring some extra stuff to the group if we need to. Moving on to the health, we do have 21k health. This gives us good survivability, and a good amount of it too. And if you happen to be with somebody who does have Evan, you go to 22k health. This gives you greater survivability inside of dungeons and trials. We have 31k stamina, which is good for our stamina pool. It's a good amount of resource for our stamina pool, and gives us just enough stamina to do what we need to do. Now, depending on what race you play, your resources will be different based on that. Like if you play a Nord, you're going to have more health and a little bit more stamina. Less magicka. If you play an orc, you're going to have more stamina, health, less magicka. If you play a Breton, you're going to have more magicka, same amount of health, and less stamina. But it still works. Okay, moving on to recoveries, we have an 855 mag recovery. This is really good. We don't want a super high mag recovery because we don't use magicka all the time, but we use it for more of supportive uses. So having that higher mag recovery allows us to get in, play with some support skills that are magicka based, and offer that to our allies while we're doing DPS. 448 health recovery and a 1058 stam recovery. This 1058 stam recovery is almost in the perfect space. Once you pop a potion, this goes to the perfect amount, we'll say. Alright, going over our spell damage and weapon damage. Our weapon damage is coming in at 3096. This is unbuffed with a 48% weapon critical. We do have a 1736 spell damage with a 31% spell critical. Please remember, you can also boost your spell damage because of one of the enchants you use. We also have a 15,850 spell resist, almost 16k on that, and then almost 15.5k physical resist, which is really good. This allows you to have that really good amount of survivability so you can sustain longer in fights and stay closer to your enemies. Alright, moving on to the Mundus Stone. We are using the Thief Mundus Stone for playing primarily damage dealer. Now, you can use the Lover with this, but I will say this, your crit's going to be pretty low. So it's not as advisable. The reason for the Thief Mundus Stone is basically to boost our critical damage output, so we can get higher crits more often, more effectively. Now, you do go to about a 58% critical, which is nice when you're using a power pot, which is good. Now, if you want to play this as a tank, it's better to swap to the Lady Mundus Stone to give you those better resistances. Now, when you play this as a tank, it is primarily considered an off-tank in Trials, and a main tank in Dungeons. And you can equip a sword and shield if you want to on the front bar. It still works. I just prefer playing it with the dual wielding bow. Alright, now if you want to play this as a healer, the Atronach Mundus Stone, or the... I forget the name of it, but I'm going to go look, because I don't use this one very often, but I believe it's called the Ritual. The Ritual will give you increased healing done by 11% base, but with the Mundus Stones you get even more, so it does help with your overall healing effectiveness. So it does make you a more effective healer in the long run. Oops. And that's it for the Mundus Stones. Moving on to food that we use. We primarily use a tri-stat food because we want a good amount of health, stamina, and magicka in our build, so we can take advantage of all three resource types. Rangers use a lot of mixed skills and abilities sometimes. Sometimes they use a mix of magicka and stamina abilities. Sometimes they use just stamina abilities, depending on how they're playing. But they're very, very good at playing support while dealing damage. So that's why we kind of follow into this tri-stat setup. Alright, going into our inventory. If you are going to play this as a tank, it's better to use tripods. This gives you all three resources back immediately. And then on top of that, you get major fortitude, major intellect, and major endurance, increasing your health recovery, stamina recovery, and magic recovery by 20%. That's very good. Moving on to the next potions we use when we're playing a healer, we use spell power pots. These can give us back magicka immediately. They also give us that major intellect, increasing mag recovery, and they give us major sorcery and major prophecy, increasing our spell damage by 20% and our spell critical by 2191. That's a 10% increase, by the way. Alright, and then of course we do use the tri-stat foods, which is the longfin pasty and melon sauce. This really helps out with keeping all three resources at a maximum level, so we can take advantage of all three resource types. Alright, now going over the sets, and you guys have probably already seen most of the sets. You can see them in my inventory, which cases I have open. So we're going to start with the monster set. We are using Zons. Now Zons is a questionable set. A lot of people are going to question this, but Zons works really well into this, because if you think about it, you hunt undead, you hunt basically you're Van Helsing in a way. You hunt vampires, you hunt wraiths, liches, that kind of stuff. You hunt undead. That's your speciality. So you use a lot of holy type stuff to do that. Zons is a very kind of holy type item when you look at it. One piece and spell critical. The two piece, when you deal damage to a nearby enemy with a light or heavy attack, you have a 20% chance to create a beam of fire that will connect with your enemy. The beam deals X amount of flame damage every 1 second to your enemy for 5 seconds. Every second this damage is increased by 50%. The beam is broken if the enemy moves further than 8 meters away, and this effect can occur once every 18 seconds. Since we're already standing so close to the enemy, this is really good because it does this high intense damage right up on them. So it allows us to get that high burst of damage right out the door. And it happens on light and heavy attacks. So we do a lot of light attack weaves with this build. So as you're doing your light attack weaves, Zons will proc, do a lot of damage, and you're like, okay. But yeah, it works out really well. The next set we're using, of course, is Hunting's Rage. That's pretty much going to be the standard here for Rangers, and it works out. So the 2-piece adds weapon critical, 3-piece max stam, 4-piece weapon critical, 5-piece weapon damage. Now, together this gives you a good stamina pool resource, it gives you that good weapon critical resource, and it gives you that good amount of weapon damage. It allows you to build for higher weapon damage so you do more damage overall, because you don't have a lot of penetration. So, it works out. Moving on to the next set, and this is going to be another one a lot of people are going to question, but you'll see why I use it. We use Bloodthorn's Touch. So this one is a really good set. One of the reasons why is the 2 to 4 piece. The 2-piece adds more spell damage. This improves your healing done with magic-based abilities. It also gives you more max magicka. That's how we get to that 20k magicka pool. And then the 4-piece adds magicka recovery. So this gives us a good balance of resources, damage, and recovery. We don't need to worry too much about crit with this, because we're not building for high crit for damage, we're building for high crit for healing. The 5-piece, when you deal direct damage, you restore X amount of magic and stamina. This can occur once every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, it doesn't matter what you're doing, as long as you're doing your rotation properly, you will be doing a light attack every 5 seconds. That light attack is considered direct damage, and you will proc this set, and you will get 660 magicka and stamina. That's why we, like I said, there's a perfect amount of magic recovery in this build. There's a perfect amount of stamina recovery in this build. So you can focus more on stamina damage with support from magicka. Alright, going over the traits and enchants on the gear. Starting with the monster set, we are using a medium monster set helm with an invigorating trait. The reason for the invigorating is for the higher stamina and magicka recovery. Playing with both stats and utilizing them in a build, you want that recovery rate to be really good, so you can take advantage of both magicka and stamina. With this setup, you can take advantage of both really well. Sorry, I don't mean to keep coughing, guys. Moving on to the shoulders, we are, we're also using a tri-stat enchant so we can hybridize our character and play more effectively with all 3 stats. Moving on to the shoulders, we are using a Divine's Max Stamina medium shoulders. The Divines is to increase our Mundus Stone effect, and the Stamina is there to boost our stam pool. Moving on to the body, we are using a reinforced Hunting's Rage chest heavy. The reason for this is a heavy piece, or the heavy chest itself, is going to give you the highest amount of resistances out of all the armor types. The reason for the reinforced is to make it work more effectively with higher resistances. This allows you to build for high resistance on a damage dealer. So it works out really well. The tri-stat enchants, again, is there for the hybridization of the character, so you can play with all 3 stats in all 3 roles, but you can also take advantage of all 3 stats as your primary role, which is damage dealer. Moving on to the gloves, we are using medium gloves, Divine's Max Stamina. This is, again, to boost that Mundus Stone effect and to give us that higher stamina pool. The belt is light, because this is a crafted set. We can actually get away with a light belt here. We will have more max stamina, and on the belt, Divine's Max Stamina. The stamina, of course, to boost our stam pool. The Mundus Stone, and Divines to boost the Mundus Stone effect. Moving on to the boots, same thing, guys. Max Stamina, Divines. The Max Stamina, I'm not going to keep explaining, but to boost our stam pool, and the Divines to increase our Mundus Stone use. And then last but not least, we do have leggings, a medium, invigorating, and these are going to be tri-stat as well. The invigorating, of course, to help us with our resource management, and that tri-stat to help us hybridize and use all 3 resources, or have a greater amount of all 3 resources. Moving on to the jewelry, we are using the Bloodthorn's jewelry on all 3 pieces, the rings and the bolt necklace. The first 2 rings are both tri-rune. The reason for the tri-rune, and I keep getting asked this, why do you keep doing this tri-stat setup? The tri-rune and the tri-stats allow me to hybridize the builds into all 3 roles more effectively, and in some cases, even the sets can help me hybridize into all 3 roles. So, But the jewelry really plays into this because it does give me 1 point more than what I get for a tri-stat enchant. So it's a little bit more effective. I mean, a tiny bit. It's a hair effective, but I like it because it does give me that max stamina, max magic, and max health. And then I do have 2 weapon damage on the rings, and this is to maximize our weapon damage output. Now moving on to the necklace, we are using a Bloodthirsty necklace with a stam recovery. Now, we're not too worried about our mag recovery. We get enough of that with this just 1 mag recovery on the Bloodthorn's Touch set. But the Bloodthirsty with the stam recovery, that gives us greater damage potential when enemies are below 25% health by increasing our damage done by 10%. The stamina recovery helps us with our stam recovery overall, so. And it does give us a little bit more stam recovery than magic recovery. So that's why we can reach this higher value of stamina recovery. Alright, moving on now to the weapons. On the front bar we have a sharpened sword. And the reason for the sharpened sword is swords do give you increased damage by 3%. Now this damage that it deals, that's 3% extra. I'm still trying to figure out if it does apply to every ability you use, whether it's magicka or stamina. But it seems to affect that, so I'm just going to go with that. And then the sharpen is to give us that higher physical and spell penetration, just by a little bit. Now moving on to our offhand, we are using a Nirnhone dagger with an absorbed stamina. And if you guys are wondering why the flame enchant, it's just, it kind of fits the theme of when you fight undead, you want something that's going to hurt them. And a sword of fire is kind of like you're using a holy flame to burn the enemy, so it kind of fits that premise. Now the offhand, we are using an absorbed stamina with a Nirnhone trait. The absorbed stamina enchant is going to give us extra physical damage on our light attacks, weaving, and it's going to give us a little bit of stamina back. Now that's going to happen every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds we're getting an extra 177 stamina. That's more than enough to keep us going with the Bloodthorn's Touch and our recovery rate. The Nirnhone is there to increase our offhand damage itself, but to also give us that 6% off the offhand added to our main damage overall. So we want that greater damage potential. Alright, moving on to the bow. We are using an infused Bloodthorn bow, and the reason for the infused trait is it increases the enchantment effect by 30% and reduces the enchantment cooldown by 50%. We are using a weapon damage enchant. Now when you use a weapon damage enchant, it doesn't increase just weapon damage, it increases both weapon damage and spell damage by X amount for 5 seconds. We can keep this up 100%. If we can do the rotation good enough, you can keep this applied 100% all the time to your enemy. This will give you that higher weapon and spell damage. And that just depends on what spells you're using with the build. So, because you have quite a few to choose from. Alright, now that you guys have seen that, we are going to go over skills, and we're going to start with the Aedric Spear line in the class skills. And I'm going to tell you this, I take all the stamina morphs for this build. So any a morph that is stamina based, I will take it over magicka based ones. The magicka ones I primarily take for group support or adding just a little bit of oomph to my character to add a few more dots or something. So with the Aedric Spear line, we do take the ultimate active abilities and passives. The reason for the passives is because we want to take advantage of every passive we can on our character, no matter what we're doing. Dawn's Wraith, I do the same thing, passives, active abilities, and ultimate, because I do use every aspect of my character, whether I'm playing a tank, a healer, or damage dealer. On Restoring Light, same thing, I take the ultimate, active abilities, and passives. Weapons skill lines. We primarily use dual wield and bow, so we take those ultimates, active abilities, and passives for both. If you want to use other tools with this, like say a Resto Staff for healing, you can unlock the Resto Staff skill line, and the same thing goes for Sword and Shield for tanking. Alright, moving on to armor, passives, and abilities. Light armor, we take the top 3 passives because one of the things about Templars is they get 4% reduced magicka cost. and stamina cost and ultimate cost. So we can take advantage of a lot more of these in this build type. So spell warding, evocation we can take advantage of, and along with grace. Medium armor, we take all the passes because we are a medium armor build. We want to take advantage of every possible advantage we can get. And then heavy armor, we take the top 3 because the bottom 2 require you to wear 5 pieces or more of heavy armor. But we can take advantage of at least these top 3 because we do wear 1 piece of heavy armor. World skills, soul magic. The ultimate, active ability, and passive here, the first one, are all optional. The bottom 2 I would suggest you take. I do got a cough, guys. Alright. Moving on to the guild, Fighters Guild. Ultimate, active abilities, and passives. And it's pretty much going to be like this with the Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, Sigil Order, and Undaunted. We are going to take everything. Now, I keep getting asked, Sherman, why do you keep taking all these skills? Because you can't use them all on your bar at the same time. I can't use them all on my bar at the same time, but I can use them in different situations at different times. The reason for learning all the different skills for the Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, Sigil Order, and Undaunted is so I can take advantage of everything my character has access to, and this includes skills. Having greater access to skills allows you more flexibility to play your character in any situation, in any given role. So if I'm playing PvP, I can play my character as a group support, a damage dealer, or as a tanky type character. I can do all 3 all at once, or I can do all 3 specialized. And what I mean by specialized is that means I can build my character to be specialized in all 3 different roles. And support in PvP is playing a healer, basically. You're using healing skills along with damage skills, along with support stuff to offer aid to your group. And that's pretty much what you can do with this character when you play him that way. And you have certain skill lines unlocked, you have certain passives unlocked, you can take greater advantage of those skills and those skill lines. There's a lot of things you have to understand that I take these things for a reason. So when it comes to the Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, and Sigil Order, I take the ultimate, active abilities, and passives that best reflect my ability to play this character the way I want them to work. When it comes to Undaunted, I do the same thing, and remember, every Undaunted skill is a synergy, so this works really good in group dynamics, no matter what group dynamic you're playing. If you're playing Overland, and you're in a group in an area fighting, say, a world boss, I can use some of these skills to help out, like Mystic Orbs, or Sanguine Altar, Tangling Webs, even Spike Bone Shield, to help aid my group. And I can use Inner Rage for when I want to tank, without using Sword and Board. Alright, moving on now to Alliance War. Also make sure you get the passives for Undaunted. And to get the passives and the active skills for Undaunted, a lot of people have been asking me this too, is through dungeons. Doing the story mode of the dungeons, that means playing through the quests inside the dungeons. Playing the Undaunted dailies, doing their Undaunted, going to the Undaunted camps, doing the Undaunted dailies at the camp will garner you a different amount of experience towards this, either 10 points or 20 points depending on the difficulty. In normal mode it's 10 points, 20 points for veteran and hard mode. And then you also get different rewards and keys based on what difficulty you play on as well. And then you can also play the Undaunted normal dailies or veteran dailies, and those will also garner you experience towards Undaunted. Moving on to Alliance War. Now, Alliance War skills you can only get in PvP Battlegrounds or Cyrodiil, and that's the only way you can unlock them. You have to get what's called Alliance Points. Alliance Points are earned from killing players, capturing locations, capturing keeps, and I'm not sure about the scrolls for the different locations, but I think if you return a scroll from one faction to another, you actually get AP as well. I've never done that, so I've never gotten Imperial, like the Emperor thing or anything like that. I've never been interested in it. I play PvP to unlock the skills, then I leave. I only play PvP when I'm in the mood for it from then on. So the skills themselves, though, you can unlock from doing that stuff. By either playing Battlegrounds or playing Cyrodiil. And like I said, you get AP from doing different stuff. So, going over the abilities I use the ultimate and two active abilities in the assault line because I can use these effectively in PvE very well. You can use rapid maneuvers in PvE and magic detonation, but magic detonation definitely works better in PvP. And also, when it comes to the passive, most of the passives are PvP related. When it comes to support, same thing. You have certain skills that work better in PvP than in PvE, and I take the ones that work best in PvE, along with from the ultimate active abilities and even the one passive magical aid. The rest of these are PvP related when it comes to the passives and the two active skills. Siege Shield works against siege weapon damage. It reduces it by 50%. And then Revealing Flare actually just exposes enemies that are stealth and a bigger radius. So it's kind of a nice thing, but also, eh. And then the Combat Medic and the Battle Resurrection is both PvP related. So moving on to racials, we are a Khajiit with this, and again, I will say this, any race can play this build. I do not restrict this to specific races, and I do not pick specific races to give it the op playstyle. I pick races based on just, okay, I'm making a new character, what haven't I played, what haven't I done a new character with lately? Okay, I haven't done it with a Wood Elf, I'm going to make it a Wood Elf, I'm going to make it a Khajiit, I'm going to make it an Argonian, and I just pick that way. The reason why I do this is because this way you can see that any race can play any of these builds that I release. Alright, but with Khajiit you get robustness. This increases your health recovery by 100 and your stamina and magic recovery by 85. You also get Lunar Blessing, which increases max magicka, health, and stamina by 825. And then Feline Ambush, which increases your critical damage and critical healing by 10%. Since we are a hybrid character, Khajiits play really good hybrid because of this one factor. They get that higher critical damage and critical healing, and it works out really well. They also get decrease your detection radius and stealth by 3 meters, and this helps in PvP a lot. Moving on to crafting, Alchemy. Medicinal use is one of the passives that I would suggest you get. Don't try and rush it. Take your time to get it. But basically, when using potions, your resulting effects last 30% longer. That means like the major sorcery, major brutality, your recovery rates, those recovery percentages, those effects last almost the full duration, if not more, of what the potion lasts normally, which is 45 seconds. And I think it makes them 47 seconds for the duration of the effects, not the duration of the potion. So that means you can pretty much keep potions active 100% and keep the benefits 100%. And that primarily is used for dungeons and trial play and sometimes PvP. Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. This is just helpful in any situation, because I use food even when I'm playing Overland, and a lot of people say I'm stupid for that, but you know what? I want to be able to play every ounce of content without requiring a group most of the time, because I solo play a lot. If I need help with something, I call upon my friends, and I usually wait until they're on to do that. And it's usually something stupid like, hey guys, I need help with this one world boss, I can't kill it. And usually they're like, what? But they'll come and help me and we'll kill it. And then that's where food comes into play really well for that. But basically, Gourmand and Connoisseur add 20 minutes to the duration of any eaten food or drink. So you get 20 minutes more added to them. So it's a really nice benefit. Alright, now we're going to go over skills on the bars, starting with the front bar. And like I said, we take advantage of everything, magicka and stamina with this. So the first bar, we are using the first ability, which is called Blood Craze. This does X amount of damage to the target up front, X amount of damage over 10 seconds, and then also it heals you every 2 seconds for the duration. So you will heal for 5 ticks of health. It's really nice. It's just like an extra, hey, I'm getting extra health. The next one we have here is called Silver Shards, and this is to fit into that whole hunter idea. One of the things that I did was I looked at every aspect of the character and I said, okay, how can I take advantage of my character in the fact of hunting undead? One of the things in the Fighters Guild is a passive called Skilled Tracker. And this one, your Fighters Guild abilities deal an additional 20% damage to undead, Daedra, and werewolves. So that means your Silver Shards will deal more damage against undead, Daedra, and werewolves. Undead and they mention this in the game in one of the printouts on the screen when you're zoning into a place or things like that. It lists what undead are considered in ESO, and that's skeletons, zombies, wraiths, ghosts, liches, and vampires. So those 6 things get increased damage from the crossbow. But not only do they get that 20% more damage from the crossbow, but they also get reduced movement speed by 40% for 4 seconds, and it can fire up to 5 additional bolts at enemies near the initial target for 47% less damage. You guys remember when I said imagine playing like Van Helsing type character from the movie with the guy who played Wolverine, I forget his, Hugh Jackman? It's basically that. This is like that repeater crossbow he had. So your character pulls out this little hand crossbow, fires it, and you'll see multiple arrows come out and hit multiple targets. And the first target will take the maximum amount of damage. The other ones take 47% less damage, but they're also boosted by 20% if they're undead, Daedra, or werewolves. I really like Silver Shards. The next ability we have is called Biting Jabs. Now this is a really good ability because it deals X amount of damage up front, X amount of damage to all other enemies. So when you cast this, it hits 4 consecutive times in a row, so it'll fire 1, 2, 3, 4, and your person just basically stabs 4 times with this light spear. And it'll deal damage to the initial target and all other targets. So anything standing with this in this 8 by 6 meter radius, so 8 meters long, 6 meters wide radius, gets hit by this. And then the final strike reduces the movement speed of enemies by 70% for 2 seconds. So this plays well into the Silver Shards as well, because you're going to reduce their movement speed by 40% initially, and then whatever their movement speed is next is not 70%. Okay, you're just going to reduce it again by 70% for 2 seconds. So these guys will move even slower. The next ability, and also this will give you Major Savagery, increasing weapon critical by 2191 for 8 seconds. This helps you sustain that better in your rotation. Moving on, we do have Flying Blade. This one, you throw basically a dagger out. It does X amount of damage at the target and also grants you Major Brutality, increasing your weapon damage by 20% for 20 seconds. The next ability we use is another damage over time ability, a dot ability. And I actually use one of 2 abilities here, so I'm going to show you guys the 2 abilities that I'll use. So Solar Barrage is a really nice AoE damage ability. What it does is basically blasts out a solar storm around you, or holy magic around you, that blasts enemies, dealing X amount of magic damage every 2 seconds for 8 seconds. While this ability is active, you gain Empower, increasing your damage of your light attacks by 40%. So that means for the duration, 8 seconds. Every time you deal a light attack in that 8-second rotation, which you're going to deal 4, that's 40% more damage added to those 4 attacks. So I really like this. The other ability I like to use is called Vampire's Bane, and basically because it fits the whole idea of hunting undead. But basically this one, you throw out this fiery orb from your hand, and it will deal radiant heat damage is what it says. But it deals X amount of flame damage on contact, X amount of damage over 14 seconds, and it also reduces movement speed again by 40% for 5 seconds. Upon activation, you gain Major Prophecy, increasing your spell critical rating by 2191. So that really helps. Alright, moving on to our ultimate. We do use Flawless Dawnbreaker with this, and this deals X amount of damage up front, X amount of damage over 6 seconds. But while slotted, your weapon damage is increased by 5%. I really like that skill. It works out really well, especially on the front bar where it boosts the weapon damage of all your abilities here that are stamina based. Alright, moving on to the back bar. We have our first ability, which is called Rearming Trap. This one, basically, you throw a trap out that deals that takes 1.5 seconds to activate. Once it activates or triggers, it deals X amount of damage up front, X amount of damage over 6 seconds, and immobilizes the enemy for 6 seconds, and grants you Minor Force, increasing your critical damage by 10%. After being triggered, the trap resets and can be triggered one more time. Moving on to the next ability we have on the bar, it is called Venom Arrow. This deals X amount of damage up front, X amount of damage over 10 seconds, and if the enemy is hit, is casting an ability or whatever in any way, shape, or form, magic or stamina ability, they are interrupted, set off balance, stun for 3 seconds. Next ability we have is Endless Hail. Now this does X amount of damage over every 0.5 seconds for 10 seconds. So this will hit 20 times in total, dealing X amount of damage. It's really nice. Unfortunately, it doesn't slow enemies or anything, but that's okay. Next ability we use is called Ritual of Retribution, and this is basically a nice ability. It cleanses you of 2 harmful effects. So you can use this to keep yourself cleansed of harmful effects while in dungeons, fighting vampires, fighting ghosts, all that kind of stuff, because you do get a lot of negative effects put on you by those types of enemies, so this really helps. And then while in the area, you and your allies are healed for X amount of health, while the enemies take X amount of magic damage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds. Allies in the area can activate the Purify Synergy, cleansing all harmful effects from themselves and healing for X amount of health. This scales with your highest offensive stat, which is really nice. And then moving on to the next ability. The next ability we use is called Restoring Focus. Now this is going to boost your physical and spell resistance by giving you Major Ward and Major Resolve by 5,280. You also recover 240 stamina every second for the 20-second duration. And then standing within the rune increases physical and spell resistance granted by 50%. So usually what I do is when I'm up against an enemy or something and I'm doing my rotation, I will just put this down right in front of them like that. And I will go to 23k spell resist with 23k physical resist. This just makes me super tanky, so I can take a few more hits than other people. On top of that, I will be putting on my Ritual of Retribution so I can heal a little bit. So, last ability we have, and this is an optional ability. You can float this out with your bow ultimate, which is Ballista, but is Solar Prison. This is where some more of that group support comes into play. Basically, you call down a fragment of the sun that deals X amount of magic damage every second for 10 seconds in the area, afflicting enemies with major maim, reducing their damage done by 30%. An ally in the area can activate the Synergy Gravity Crush that deals X amount of magic damage to all enemies in the area and stunning them for 5 seconds. I really like this ability. I know a lot of people probably don't get why you would use this. How many of you remember that scene in the movie where he throws out basically the holy hand grenade? It's like this light ball that the guy throws out, and it shoots beams like sunlight out in all directions. That's the way I see this, is it does that, and because of that, it reduces their damage effect because it inflicts them with that minor or major maim. But that major maim comes from that idea of like, hey, I just messed you up, now try and hurt me. So it basically, it hurts them and it startles them, and it does a lot of damage over 10 seconds, so it's really nice. Alright, now that I've shown you the skills, now we are going to go over the champion levels. Starting with, of course, the red tree or the warrior tree. And we have 56 in the ironclad. This is going to reduce your damage taken from direct damage attacks by 20%. And again, you guys are going to notice I have a weird setup in my resistance values, and that's because I put 34 in the armor focus. This gives me an increased physical resistance by 2980. This is almost equivalent to what you get for being a Templar. Templars get a passive that increases their spell resistance, and you're basically off-balancing it with this. Now, the reason for the 4 in the spell shield is because it doesn't... You don't want to go over in your physical resistance, you want to be under in physical and higher in spell, because you do take a lot more spell damage in the game than you do physical damage. So having that little bit of extra oomph really plays well. And it also does keep it more balanced between the two values. Moving on over here to the middle red tree, we have 31 in the thick skin. This reduces your damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. We have 43 in the hardy, reducing damage taken from physical poison disease damage by 10%. And 43 into elemental defender, reducing your damage taken from flame, frost, shock, and magic damage by 10%. Moving on to the final red tree, we have 40 in the bastion, increasing the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. And 19 into quick recovery, increasing your healing received by 5%. Moving on to the middle green, or the first green tree, we have 40 in the warlord, reducing your break free cost by 16%. We have 16 in the sprinter, reducing your sprint cost by 10%, and we have 16 in the bashing focus, reducing your bash cost by 10%. Moving on to the middle green tree, we have 75 in the moon calf. This increases your stam recovery by 14%, and we have 43 in Arcanus, increasing your mag recovery by 10%. Moving on over here, we have 40 into tumbling, reducing the dodge roll cost by 16%, and 40 into Shadow Ward, reducing block cost by 16%. Moving on to the blue tree and the final tree. Yes, blue is the final tree, but this isn't. So we have 43 in the Bless. This increases healing done by 10%. I do hybridize this, so we have 23 in the Elfborn, increasing critical damage and critical healing with magic abilities by 10%. And this also applies to the Khajiits, crit rating and critical healing. So this gets added to that. So we get 20% from that. And then our minor force, we get that as well. So we actually get a 30% increase in our critical damage. And we actually get 10% on top of that because we're a Templar. It's really crazy. We also have 43 in Elemental Expert, increasing your flame, frost, shock, and magic damage done by 10%. And then moving on to the middle tree, since we primarily use dual wield and bow, we're going to put 35 points into here. This is going to increase the light and heavy attacks done with two-handed, one-handed, and shield, dual wield bow, and werewolf forms by 20%. I didn't mention this, but you can also be a werewolf with this, and it's super awesome. Next up, we have Mastered Arms. This increases your damage done with direct damage attacks by 16%. And then moving on over here, we have 43 in the Mighty. This increases your physical poison disease damage by 10%. 23 in the Precise Strikes, increasing your critical damage and critical healing with stamina abilities by 10%. And then 20 in a Thaumaturge. This increases your damage done with damage over time effects by 9%. Alright, now that I've shown you guys the skills, the CP, the gear and traits, enchants, attribute points, what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick parse on this little guy. This is going to represent like your damage in a dungeon, and then we're going to do a parse on the big guy up there that's going to represent your damage done in a trial and a really organized group. So first things first, we're going to pop a potion. We're going to go up front. We're just going to do the rotation just so you guys can see how effective this build is. And I probably will get about 24 to 25k DPS. So there we go, 24k. I can usually get between 22 and 26 normally, but I knew I was going to get about 24, 25 because I made a mistake in the rotation at the beginning. But that's pretty much that. You're going to see about a 24k damage output, and you go to about 4,252 weapon damage with a 2,408 spell damage. With a 31% crit. A lot of people are going to complain that the crit is really low, but the only real ability you're using this for is pretty much your Solar Barrage. And the reason for that is that Solar Barrage gives you that empowerment for 8 seconds. So Solar Barrage actually does do a decent amount of damage over time, as you can see. And if it crits, it deals a little bit more. So, moving on to the big guy over here. And now everything's going to change, because our damage is going to get boosted in a lot of different ways. So, and in this one, I will be using ultimates, so you guys can see what that's like too. So I'm going to use Solar Barrage. It's one of the ones I prefer to use with this, because it just does, or not Solar Barrage, Solar Disturbance, because it just adds a lot of damage to your character. But as you can see, I can keep about a 40k pressure amount of damage on this guy. Effectively, and that's because this thing just deals so much damage. It's ridiculous. So really like this character build and design. It's a lot of fun to play, but of course we are going to head off into a dungeon, so we do want to get a little bit more oomph to our character, I should say, and we are going to grab actually the Undaunted Spike Bone Shield, and we're going to put it on our bar here, and we're just going to get rid of the Flying Dagger. That's all we're going to do. Now what we're going to do is we're going to teleport over to the Depths of Malatar dungeon, and this is a really great dungeon for testing in right now, because this did come out with the Wraithstone DLC, which was added to the game right before Elsewhere, and it started the year-long season of the Dragons event, or storyline. And it's a really fun dungeon, and it's probably the only one that I can do this kind of testing in, because I can do the other one, but it's a lot more complicated if you don't know how to avoid the one-shot mechanic from the boss over there in the first boss encounter. So that's why I use this one. I can get through it really easy, and I don't have to worry about trying to avoid that one-shot mechanic. And this way I can talk while I'm doing the testing. So, but I have already tested this in here. This is to show confirmation to you guys that this thing does exactly what I said it does. So, and if you guys notice, I do a kind of a backwards rotation here. The reason why is that way I can get my heal going and my other abilities going as well. And like I said, Zon's is just ridiculously overpowered. Yeah, and I still play like a tank even when I'm solo playing. I tend to block attacks, do all that kind of stuff. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and head in to face the boss. And the boss is the first boss encounter here. If you don't know it really well, it can be quite difficult and challenging. But I've done it so many times now that it's not as difficult or challenging as it once was when I first started testing this. And I do have to stop at about 1,700,000 health, or 1.7 million health. Otherwise, he will go into his super secret hide mode, and then I can't kill him. So I need to stop doing damage right now and just let him kill me. Otherwise, he will go in his hide mode, and then I have to go around and basically trigger his traps that he leaves all over the place to kill myself, and it takes a lot longer. But yeah. That is that for the Undead Hunter Ranger, guys. I hope you guys like these builds that I've been releasing this week. I have had a lot of fun with them, and I know that some people have already told me that some of the builds reflect other builds, and they're correct, it does. And that's because we don't have a lot of options, and I mean, we have a lot of options in gear sets, but to take advantage of gear sets in certain combinations, it doesn't give us a lot of options. So, I know it sounds weird, but it's true. Alright, so that is it for this video, guys. That means you guys can choose to hit the like button if you want to, or you can choose to subscribe if you want to. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in the game. Bye.